Welcome to my history and civics class. Steam power. What is steam power? Steam power, it was one kind of power which was utilized by the scientists during the Industrial Revolution. The power which generated the system, the technique, the method, the science which generated power, this power converted into steam power. And by utilizing steam power, they also discovered the scientists discovered so many machines, and these machines utilize steam power in producing much more power, and as a result of it, the steam engine was discovered by James Watt. The steam engine gave a birth of a new network of railways, which became helpful to the British, and as a result of it, the British also was benefited with the railway lines, the productive goods which were produced from their factories and industries. They started supplying it to different parts of their country, and at the same time, the colonies where they also established their industry, they also set up railway lines there in order to supply their productive goods. The next important area of growth of steam engine various. Initially, steam engine initially developed in pump out of water from underground mining shafts, but it was later used in locomotives, steamboats and power looms. And then an engineer by the name of Thomas Newcomer built the first modern steam engine. In the year 1763, James Watt, an instrument maker at the Glasgow University, that very personality began to make improvements of the steam power, and also, it made an engine. This engine gave a birth of true steam engine, also added a crack of flywheel to provide a rotary motion. This engine enabled Robert Fulton's experimental steam vessel named Claremont to drive up Hudson in 1807. The transport system of England, the communication of England, gave a birth for the growth and development of industry. It was necessary. It was necessary for the British. It was necessary for them to improve the system of transport and communication, because roads in many parts of England were in a bad condition, so they reconstructed it in the interest of themselves. An engineer from Scotland named John McAdam made strong roads using small stones and pressed them down by a heavy roller, and then covered them with wet sand and rolled it again. By this way, they constructed new roads and made it useful as industrial towns. Now, electric power was also introduced during industrial age. In the year 1831, my dear students, Michael Faraday, you have already come to know about the name. Michael Faraday demonstrated how electricity could be mechanically produced, and hitherto small productive capacity, short transmission lines and high cost have limited the use of electric power. It was not until 1873 CE that a dynamo capable of prolonged operation was developed. In 1890, Florence boasted the world's first electric streetcar. By this way, electric power also helped the industrialist to utilize its potentialities. Now the railways, with the expansion of commerce and facilities for the movement of goods from different parts, factories and industries, the expansion of railways helped them to link other cities and towns with their capital city, with their capital. And these railways also encourage them to extend their industrial belts in different parts of the world. Throughout England, almost all major cities of England, and including villages also, they all were supplied with the productive goods which were produced from factories and industries during industrial age. Besides geographical location, it is also known that the country had large deposits of coal and iron ores. In my previous class I discussed. The demands of goods also increased by day to day. These colonies, so many colonies also are established by England in different parts of the world, in Asia, Europe and Africa, I told you earlier. Besides, the other factors that provided the incentive to produce more and more goods were the huge profits of expanding trades and commerce. And the Napoleonic Wars also helped them to be self-sufficient because of other miserable conditions of other countries of Europe. But England was the British nation, the British race, the Britishers were very intelligent. That's why they did not get themselves involved in Napoleonic Wars, and ultimately it stimulated demand and providing a full fill up to industrial revolution. Another thing is that the steam engine, use of steam engine, invention of machinery and use of steam engine, use of steam engine and machineries. The steam, in the method of spinning yarn and other inventions helped the British to produce more and more goods, much more in quantities, and also led to the production of textiles. And these transport facilities also brought radical changes in industry and commerce and gave a tremendous boost to the industrial revolution. Though water and wind were earlier used for running machines, neither of them was a dependable source of energy. Besides these sources of energy could not be used for running large factories. The use of these energy sources to run big factories, large factories, became possible with the invention of the steam engine by James Watt. And this discovery of steam as a power source used in the Industrial Revolution, while steam to run locomotives was introduced in the year 1813, the railway train started running with the help of steam in 1830 AD, greatly helping in Industrial Revolution. At the same time, after a few years later, the British set up large railway networks in our country, India, because of their colony, because of its natural resources and raw materials. They wanted to utilize it for their own industry. This improvement of transport system also helped them. The improvement of transport system also helped them to be self-sufficient. The transport system, the use of coal tar facilitated them. At the same time, the roads were not sufficient, but they constructed many new roads, also helped them to meet the needs of transportation. and afterwards railroads became necessary. The invention of the railways became necessary only because of the growth and development of its industry. The invention of railways by George Stephenson in the year 1814 also facilitated the transport of material from one place to another place, easing communication and accelerating industrial revolution. As a result of it, that commercial revolution took place. The commercial revolution also paved to be very useful to England. England was one who took the golden opportunity, who availed the golden opportunity of being prosperous, for being themselves prosperous, and ultimately it established her imperial and commercial superiority by defeating the French in the 7 Years' War. In comparison to other European countries, other European powers, the government and military establishment of England were free from corruption and more efficient, more economical, and collected revenues efficiently was utilized. Moreover, the extra earning of ship owners and merchants, the extra earnings of the ship owners and merchants also helped them, were actively invested in ventures which could be a source of additional profit for England. And ultimately, thus, the commercial revolution brought economic prosperity with it, and was one of the major causes of the industrial revolution. This British progressive policy encouraged other countries. A policy of commerce, trade, and empire building was followed by the British government, also encouraged other countries of the world. Navigation Acts were passed by the government of British to protect the British shipping companies, and at the same time, some countries of Europe like Holland, France, they also were followed the policy of industrial revolution, industrial development in their country. And other countries who were lagging behind, they also gave importance to it extraordinarily. They also gave importance to it because they wanted to be rich, prosperous like this country, England. The East India Company not only engaged itself in the profitable business, profitable trade, profitable Oriental trade, but also began the task of empire building in India. And ultimately, British progressive policy proved crucial in India in the success of industrial revolution also. This, besides the growth of population throughout the whole world, one of the most important cause of industrial revolution. And ultimately, agricultural revolution also took place. In addition, orphanage hospitals and improved medical advancements marked decline of death rate, which also resulted in a steady growth of population. And perhaps the most considerable effect was the survival of more and more children of the lower middle class and middle class parents. Urbanization was one of the most important cause and direct outcomes of the industrial revolution, urbanization. Because in the beginning I taught you that most of the villagers of different villages, remote villages, by selling their agricultural lands, they shifted from villages to cities in search of better occupation, better jobs, and they stayed there and ultimately became inhabitants of towns and cities. Some of them who had capabilities, they led modern lifestyles, and those who were lagging behind, those who were unskilled, they could not establish themselves, but led a very miserable life because they could not earn much more benefit from the industrial revolution, industrial age, and simply they remain there as factory laborers, and they they lived under a very unhygienic condition, and was not provided with sufficient, adequate health facilities. So many people, many of them died untimely. And besides, the cities became the centers of civilization and culture, attracting many people from different places who also would come from different countries, and they settled in England. They were scientists, they were thinkers, political leaders. They, and some of the rural areas where some rich people were living, they also migrated themselves from villages to cities in order to get themselves much more benefited with it during industrial revolution. However, this these changes which took place during industrial revolution, this growth had major consequences. Death rates in the cities grew significantly, and overcrowding combined with poor sanitation led to the spread of diseases and epidemics. There was no effort done by the factory owners. They could not provide any health facilities for the needy people. Naturally, death rates have increased during industrial revolution, and factory owners, mill owners, they got themselves benefited with it. The condition of the factory workers became very miserable. The capitalists exploited their workers thoroughly, and so the lives of the working classes grew miserable and, of course, burdensome. In spite of all this, in spite of not getting adequate wages, the workers had to work for 14 to 16 hours a day in poor working conditions. And not only that, they did not even have safety guards on machines, which led to frequent accidents, and there were no provisions for the care of the safety. There was no care for their safety guards. Naturally, when they died untimely death. Millions of people died during industrial age for the frequent accidents, and there were no provisions for the care of the injured and the sick. The children and women were forced to take employment instead of their husbands who died. The parents they lost. Naturally, they preferred to the employed unskilled workers since they were cheaper. As a result, the workers helped their employers, and thought that they were badly humiliated and unjustly treated and cruelly exploited. And as a result of it, it rises a social classes. These miserable conditions of the poor people, these miserable conditions of the poor farmers who left their villages in search of better jobs, better employment, their miserable condition gave a birth of a new class. And a number of political, social thinkers also came forward for their assistance in order to protect themselves from being exploited by the factory owners and mill owners. They were Karl Marx, Friedrich Engels, and they all dedicated their whole life for the upliftment of the poor people, for the all-round development of the poor people. As a result of it, a new political concept was formed that was known as socialism. A great impact of the industrial revolution was the division of society into working class and capitalist, because capitalists already made money by spending it, and at the same time the working class, they were not benefited with it. They were humiliated at the hands of the capitalists. Social evil sprang up, and it happened owing to the factory system and communication. factory system and communism. Communism, another political concept which was formed with the political leaders Karl Marx, Friedrich Engels. This led to the rise of socialism, which aimed at eliminating the capitalist class and at the same time some form of working class ownership and control of the means of production by means of framing their own policies, by encouraging the poor peasants, poor factory laborers against factory owners. With the awakening of this system, with the awakening of the factory workers, there was a demand that employers should be the only owners of the means of production, so that means of production, so that the wealth produced can be shared more fairly. Several socialists stood up to improve the conditions of the poor people, poor factory owners, poor factory laborers. And then it also, the workers of the world were called upon by the Engels, Marx and Engels, about whom I discussed earlier. The Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, these political thinkers and leaders, they wanted to set up such a society that would be free of class divisions and exploitation. A number of factories led to the development of socialism. And how was it happened? What were the factors which led to the growth and formation of a new concept, socialism? I discussed, my dear student, in my next class. Up to this, thank you.